So, yes, well, thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Of course.
We met at the Black Culture Market a few weeks back, and you're telling me about your manufacturing company in Ibadan, and we had a little interview, which went pretty viral on social media.
Nigeria to me is the next India, and India is the next China. So if you look at just the GDP alone and the manpower that you have in Africa, you just have to take a risk, I think. With a lot of us in Europe, we escape to Europe. We escape from a lot of trauma that our parents and ancestors have from being in Africa, being oppressed, being poor, being in the slums, not being able to reach their full potential. But we need to see this as 50% of the journey is complete. We have to go back. If we want to see a different Africa, we in the diaspora have to take that change. We have to go back there. I don't expect everyone to drop their shit now and to go out there. But I think if you meet one person that's done that, we should use these individuals to study them and to understand what obstacles and barriers that they had. I had many, many barriers going to Nigeria, but I knew the end goal for me is to export a black-owned product. Even if you look around here in the market, I've asked so many stores, where is your product made? The product's never made in black hands unless it's a craft item. It's made in China, it's made in India. Why can it not be made in Nigeria? Because the infrastructure isn't there yet. But I know in 10 years' time, from me being over there, it's a very long answer, I'm sorry, but there's many, many people from outside of the UK that invest in Africa. Arabs invest in Africa, the Chinese invest in Africa. All these people can't be wrong. So for me, the future is Africa.
And you were messaging me and basically saying that you got so many messages, and that even telling me the other day, telling me that people approached you like in real life. So tell me a little bit about that moment of, when I posted you and how that panned out for you the past few weeks.
Yeah, it's I don't usually go into with my head into like a perception that if I do something, this will be like the automatic output. But it's been really interesting from seeing that post go out and actually the amount of people that it resonated with. Like there's so many people that are kind of like in the steps that I was in 2 years ago that are also thinking of like expanding their life into Africa, for whether it's for personal reasons as a diasporan or it's for the purpose of opening like an enterprise. Like I've just been like inundated with like DMs from people, and it's all been like such a positive experience.
Yeah.
And for me, like I want to be able to be transparent and to let people know like what the process has been for me.
Yes.
And just to speak truthfully on that so people can use that to learn from as like a format or a template. Like I didn't have that privilege. I kind of went out there with like just whatever expectation, like whatever happens, like this is life and this is what happens when you take risks. It either goes well or it doesn't go well. So it feels really good to be doing almost like a service to help answer some of those questions that people have. It's been a bit wild, to be honest. Like I'm not used to strangers coming up to me out the blue and things like that. Like I usually work very much in the dark. I'm not really like a spotlight kind of person.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been cool.
Okay.
It's been cool. But I have to thank you for this platform and put me on this platform. Obviously,
Sure.
It's like the butterfly effect. If I didn't go to Black Culture Market, wouldn't have met you, wouldn't be sat here today. You know? So it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Thank you.
No, definitely.
Appreciate that.
No, I thank you, and I think that I've grown this platform over the past few years to like 110,000 followers now, and now it's time to actually utilize that platform to get the stories and the reception and the wisdom of the people that are of value within our community, that have melanated minds, that elevate minds. So tell me a little bit more about your process from thought to manifestation, and a little bit of a background of who you are and where you were raised and how you get to be the man you are today.
Yeah. Yes. So in the playground is where I spent most of my days. No, it's not.
I was like, where is he going with
this? I think for me, like, what was really interesting in my upbringing is like I actually grew up in London as a young child, and my dad worked as an engineer, as a design engineer, and his work often would take him into different places in the world, sometimes in Asia, sometimes mainland Europe. And I think he had got to a certain position and he decided to move us all out of London into a small town called Basingstoke. Shout out Basingstoke. And I remember arriving there and just feeling like an absolute alien. And I was very young. I wasn't really aware of like my color, like my ethnicity. Like I was too young to appreciate things like that or to even understand it. And I remember getting there and kind of just feeling a bit alienated for the first couple months. And it kind of really stood out to me when I actually grew up in London as a young child, and my dad worked as an engineer, as a design engineer. And his work often would take him into different places in the world, sometimes in Asia, sometimes mainland Europe. And I think he had got to a certain position and he decided to move us all out of London into a small town called Basingstoke. Shout out Basingstoke. And I remember arriving there and just feeling like an absolute alien. And I was very young. I wasn't really aware of like my color, like my ethnicity. Like I was too young to appreciate things like that or to even understand it. And I remember getting there and kind of just feeling a bit alienated for the first couple months. And it kind of really stood out to me when I dealt with quite a bit of racism. I think today we kind of label it as like microaggressions as opposed to macro. It was very rare that someone was in my face and very much like, I don't like you because of what you look like. It was a lot more sly. Like I had a lot of issues of being stopped search while in school. Every day was just like relentless. I remember walking home from school and seeing every black male being stopped or pulled over. And I was like, this is insane. And at that time I was listening to like NWA and like the gangster rap sort of stuff. And everything they were saying was like what was like visually happening around me. And I was like, oh, they're not talking rubbish. Like this is a real thing.
Yes.
And this is me at like 12 years old. But the thing for me, like the privilege that I had of having like a strong black male role model in my family, my dad, he very much put into my head from a very, very young age of who we are as a people and what we have done to contribute to the world society, to the economy, to everything culturally. And like I remember going into school and we would have like history, for example. And I remember, I think I got to year 9 and the whole topic was around like black history. And black history then, I don't know what the schools are teaching these days, but it was just seeing black people being lynched from trees in Georgia, in like the southern US territories. And I was very much like, this isn't really black history. Like white people were there too. I was like, this is our history. Like, we weren't there hanging ourselves up on the tree. We weren't climbing on the tree and hanging ourselves off a branch. Like, you were there doing the lynchings.
It's actually more white history than it is black history.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I was like, there's something wrong with this picture here.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, like, I'd speak to people about it and I would say, well, this is incorrectly labeled. I was like, if we want to talk about black history, then let's talk about what we've actually done, what we've attributed to society. Let's talk about, there's negativities for everything, but there is no, there's not the opposite, there's not the positive of what we've done. A lot of the inventions that we've contributed to the world. When I was, I think 12 or 13 years old, my dad bought me a Black Inventors book and that changed my entire life. And in that book, like still to this day, like seeing some of the inventions, like Granville T. Woods, who had developed the first traffic light system, the first gas mask, which all of our soldiers were using in the front line. The other one was the third rail system, which is a system for the network underground operators to communicate with the train conductors. So you wouldn't have a London Underground if not for this black man. So there's so many different levels to this. And after seeing that and seeing my dad as well, from like my first picture of what an engineer is was the image of a black man, which is my dad, which is very unusual to say out loud, because when people think of engineering, we don't really attribute black people to that. It's very much, you look into society and it's like, it's a colorless image. It's like, for me, it's not. It's very much not. Like, I grew up and my dad, from seeing him do what he did and going through all the racism and the stress and the daily microaggressions at work of people telling him that he's less than what he is, even though he's like one of the most overqualified individuals in these companies, he was still being isolated and told that, you know, we weren't expecting to see you here at this interview. We were expecting, you know, with your name, maybe it was like a Turkish person, or maybe an English person, a white person. So I think my upbringing really taught me from being isolated, because I didn't have the privilege of growing up around my own people. I was around, you know, when I went to school, I was one of 5 black kids in 5 years. That's 1,000 students, and barely anyone looks like me. And there was only 2 black males from what I remember, 3 black males. So I didn't really have someone to bounce off of. I had to really try and figure things out.
So yeah, it's quite interesting what you talk about in terms of like being a child growing up black in a very white environment. And then also about the representation of getting that book and realizing that Black history is not just about Black people hanging off trees, but we've contributed serious assets,
heavily,
you know, to society and how the world runs right now. So there's a question actually based on that in our debate date card game, which asks, based on all of that, what do you think would concern you the most about raising melanated children within the Western society, and how would you kind of tackle that issue?
I think education starts at home, and I think that's the thing that's important. I'm not a parent, I don't have kids, but from growing up and seeing different methods of raising Black children or mixed Black children in a society where you're always going to be outnumbered and you're going to be the minority, I think it's important that you instill self-love, first of all, especially within daughters, within Black daughters. It's really important to teach them from a very early age that you are a beautiful individual. You're beautiful for being an individual, but on top of that, you are a beautiful Black child. And I think from growing up, a lot of the times that wasn't really instilled in us. It was very much like a try and figure out an apparatus of survival tactics in order to find your way through the schooling system, in order to get yourself your first job, in order to blend in order to code switch so you can obviously assimilate with your environment. And I think they're all coping mechanisms that we were taught as a method of survival.
Yeah.
But I think these days society is slowly moving forwards. In some ways it's moving backwards, but I think it's important to distill that information of identity into your children before they go out into the world, and because they have something to compare from what people are telling them. If you're unequipped, like what Malcolm X said, like if you don't, what did he say? The education is the passport to your future, and I think that education starts at home.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's really important that the education is at home first.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about, I mean, first of all, I was making jokes about it the other days, but congratulations for making a Nigerian that proud and becoming an engineer. Yeah. There's only a very narrow line of things you're allowed to be as an African child. And it's doctor, engineer, lawyer, but you made it.
Yeah.
Well done, finally somebody.
Huh? I know, occasional football player too.
Yeah, but it's not something that has been
no, it's not.
championed. It's just something that happened, and then the dad was like, okay, I'm proud now.
Yeah.
But you're an engineer. Yeah. So that was a really shit.
I feel like I need to stand up and accept a medal or something like that.
I mean, yeah. So it's first of all, it's nice that I'm sure you made your dad very proud, and also from a legacy perspective of him being an engineer, you becoming an engineer. So can you tell me a little bit more about your choice of becoming an engineer, and then how did that kind of come about for you?
I think for me, like going back to what we were discussing, I think the blueprint of what's the capacity of what's capable in becoming an engineer, I think was from having my dad actively present and him encouraging me to ask questions when he'd come home from work. And I'd see like this is going back now to like the 90s, but he'd come home with these massive like sheets of paper that were folded like 25 times with like these sketches, and they were dimensioned and annotated. And to me, I was like, what's he working on? Is he building like a spaceship or something? Like, what is this? And it just really intrigued me. I was like, I don't know what this is. And he sort of let me in and was like, yeah, so this is what I do. I design machinery to assemble all the cars you see on the road. And I was like, all the cars? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, this is like, even as a kid, I was like, this is a big deal. I was like, my dad's not a postman. Like, what's going on? And then from going into school, like, I always enjoyed art, but I also excelled at maths. I mean, more at a later level, not really in primary school or secondary school. But once I found that there was a applicational use to the knowledge I was learning, it switched me on, because it didn't feel like I was, sounds bad, but I didn't feel like I was learning for no reason to hit a quota for the school. And then I just started to appreciate the everyday objects around me. I just fell in love with design as a whole. I just loved the aesthetics of things. But on top of that, I wanted to know how they were made. And that's design engineering, to be honest, as a whole. So I went on to study at a technical college, manufacturing engineering. And then from there, I went to study at the University of Hertfordshire, a subject called industrial design, which is almost like a hybrid of design engineering and product design. So it's like a fusion between the two, which really sort of helped me and still helps me today, to be honest.
Lovely. Can you talk a little bit about your transition from the idea of starting a manufacturing company in Nigeria to the manifestation? So the story behind that, and when did you first think about it? Where were you? What was your moment of realization, and how did you then step by step go towards manifesting it?
Yeah, so I think for me, like, and the same for everyone else, lockdown had happened and it just changed the trajectory of everything. And I spent a long time at home, like, you know, with no income or anything like that, because in the time I was working pretty much full-time in events and working freelance as an engineer. And I was very much like, what do I actually want in life? What do I want to do? Like, there's all these ideas that I have and all these things that I stand for, these elements that make me me, but when it comes down to it, my actions aren't speaking for what I am actually saying. So for me, I really wanted to go back to Nigeria. I say go back as if I personally came there, but as a diasporan, we very much use that term because it's almost synonymous to our attachment to our ancestors. And so I decided to speak with my family, specifically my dad, and to say to him, you know, I have this idea that's been spinning around in my head for a long time. It's going to sound very stupid, so pardon, but I really would like to open up like a small facility in Nigeria and to develop like some products that we have developed anyway over the years, but to produce it there for export. And like his response like wasn't great at the start, because it was very much like, what YouTube videos have you been watching that you were inspired to go and do that? It's like the place is like a very difficult place to do business, let alone like to live every day, day to day, to figure out where your income is coming from. So I sort of, I went on to conduct feasibility studies. So I traveled to Nigeria early 2022, and I looked around to see what the costing would be. How much would it cost to have a team of people? How much would it cost to rent/buy a factory? And then obviously all the personal expenditures that you have, such as rent, things like that, just the everyday day-to-day things. Like, can I live here, essentially? And then how do I feel also being here? Potentially could be here for the rest of my life if this business does grow legs and take off. And I decided to spread out from Lagos and go to a beautiful cultural city called Ibadan, which is in Oyo State. So it's about 100 and, I might be wrong, between 100 to 130 kilometers, I believe, if you take the express road going north from Lagos State. And from seeing the space that they had there and the infrastructure that was in place for me to rent out a warehouse, I found like certain business parks, almost their own version of like what you would call a business park, I suppose. But the interesting thing is they had a lot of old colonial buildings that were abandoned, but you could tell they were factories. Like they had all the electrical power inputs still there in place. And I saw one, and we're based at an area called Iyaganku, which is the old BAT, British American tobacco site, which is a 4,000 meter squared warehouse. and they were selling a space which was 1,000, which is right in the middle, and I just fell in love straight away. Like I saw everything inside, and I could immediately visualize like where every machine we need would go, where our office would be, and I was like, I fell in love with it, and I was very much like this. If I'm gonna do this and these feasibility studies carry out correctly, then this is the place to do it. So after finding spaces, I then went to a series amount of trade shows, and luckily for me, and this is another thing I'd say, if you don't have direct connections, as in people to people in Africa, it's going to be so much more difficult to set up an enterprise. For me, luckily, my family here in the UK and in Nigeria has stayed in touch in that whole time.
Yeah.
So I have relatives that have never left Nigeria. So they've cultivated themselves, owned their own small businesses and things like that, and could help me out in terms of ensuring that I'm not going to get screwed out of the deal, obviously, when setting up the business.
Yeah.
But after conducting my various feasibility studies over 6 months, 7 months, I saw that the market, the current market, was big enough for me to turn over a profit anyway. So for me, I was like, if that's the benchmark and I can turn over, then no one's going to convince me not to come here, because anything up from there is obviously going to be a bigger net profit margin. And that's just domestically speaking, not even talking about exporting to neighboring African countries or even overseas territories in the US or in Europe. So yeah, that was kind of the journey. I came back to the UK, I packed all my stuff, I sent over containers worth of machinery, and dealing with the Lagos port is a different beast in its own. It's so difficult to clear your items, because the other thing I found,
everybody wants a cut.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. And the thing, like, I was told, you know, like, people always talk about like the government is corrupt, politicians are corrupt, all these things. But the thing I didn't know, and no one told me this, is that corruption flows down.
All the way to the bottom.
Oh, way down, like way down. And I spent so much time there thinking, like, in certain situations, I'm like, this has nothing to do with the government, how this person is treating all these people. I'm like, because you have local enforcers, you have people that are managers of offices, you have chiefs, but mostly, to be honest, you get landlords of industrial spaces, and they can create a difficult time for you for setting up. The most difficult thing is just setting up, if I'm being honest. Like, the business has now been running for nearly 2 years, and the hardest part was just getting to point zero, to ground zero.
Wow,
like,
well
was
done.
extremely tough. But we're there now, and perseverance took me through.
Wow. I mean, you know, I hear so many stories about, especially Nigeria, being Nigerian myself, half Nigerian myself. Even talking to my dad about him buying his houses in Lagos, and the corruption and the how you say it, corruption and the abuse, actually, like financial, emotional abuse he went through, you know. It's real, and it can put you off. And there's so many people talking about doing business in African countries and how corrupt it is, and how even the people, the local people that are, like you say, the corruption trickles down all the way.
It does.
And even the local people the local communities that would benefit the most from what you're doing, looking at the bigger picture, they're also there to get their little cut out of it. I mean, I guess what I notice a lot also when I go to visit African countries, that it's just this like hindsight of like long-term thinking when it comes to business, and also doing business with diasporans especially, it's not really there like that. So you think about it and be like, oh, you know, I'm having somebody comes from the diaspora and wants to open a business to initially actually also add value to the African economy or the economy of that country. You'd think then the people that you hire, that you work with, be like, oh my God, this is great. This is gonna, you know, up the GDP of the country, and this is gonna. But they're like, no, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Either get my cut or you leave.
Yeah. That's kind of
and you
what
know,
it is.
and I think you can now go and demonize that and be like, oh, they're not smart, or oh, that this, that. But you can also just take it for what it is.
Yeah.
Realize that you know, this mindset also comes from a colonial background,
Yes.
you know, and these people are also suffering the after effects still of colonialism. These are very young countries.
It is.
You know,
It is.
Nigeria,
People forget
Ghana, even Caribbean countries, they're very young countries. So
They
let's
are.
not act like they have had all this time, hundreds and centuries of time to establish these systems.
Nigeria is my dad's age, pretty much. Like, that's a human being's age.
You know, so instead of just demonizing that all the time, we just take it for what it is, calculate that into your budget, and still do what you're doing, because we're not going to have a different choice if we really want to develop the continent.
It's also, you have to be, like, Nigeria, I always say, is a problem solver's playground. Like, there is so many things that can be done there, but the thing is, when I get into conversations with business people here in Europe, like, a lot of the times when I'm talking, they see it as a fallacy. Because, and I understand why, there are big multinational businesses such as Nestle that have gone over to Nigeria. And because I read an article literally the other day about it, and it like pronged something in me from a chat I'd had with a friend at a bar. And like, these businesses, they go over because it's almost like the last front. It's the last uncharted territory. It's like, okay, Asia's developed, it's on its way. You've got China, India, Malaysia, all these nations are really starting to grow in terms of their GDP, their export, what they're doing. And then obviously Europe, which has been industrialized for centuries, thank you to our free labor as well, by the way. And then obviously you have the US, which is the same story, and South America. But the thing is, doing business I can't speak for Africa, and I think we need to detract from speaking as Africa as a whole. I think when we speak of culture, obviously it's the most diverse continent on the planet. But I think even in terms of business, doing business in Nigeria will be totally different from doing business in Uganda or Mozambique to Ghana. It's a vast, vast continent, and doing business is different depending on where you go to. But to rubber band back to my point, there is a fallacy sometimes with people here when you say you want to go to Africa, you want to establish a business, you want to develop a product to export, and they will just meet you with a barrage of negativity. And I understand why that is, because in their own heads, in their own life, in the economy that they've been raised in, it makes no sense to do something like that. But there's nonsensical people today who are the solution providers tomorrow. You have to be someone that can step outside of the box and to be brave and to say, I'm willing to fail. Like, I'm willing to fail to do this. I'm not doing this to prove a point. I'm doing this because the people that live there matter to me, and I don't think they're being served correctly by their own government or by anyone in the world. The dangerous territories that we're in now is that Africa will experience a recolonization, but this time it won't be from artillery and warfare. It will be through the exposure of capitalism inside Africa, inside Nigeria, inside Ghana. And if local governments aren't careful and these businesses establish themselves to a point where the local people really rely on them, which has already really happened, to be honest, I can't lie. But if certain levels are hit in terms of China coming in, which is already in, and building X amount of infrastructures that we rely on now for maintenance, so we keep going back to them. Like, Africa will not be for us. It will not be for people in the diaspora. It will not be for the native Africans, because everything that's being built is not by people that look like them. And for me, that's an issue. When I go to different parts of the world, they have their own people serving them in their manner. Only when it comes to us does it become wildly absurd that people that look like us serve us. And when you look at the export in terms of the raw materials and resources that we have in Africa, the world needs that. If that tap goes tight one day, the world is finished. But we should be at the source of that supply chain as black people. You look at Nigeria, it's the biggest population of black people concentrated under a nation. That has power in itself. Of course, all black people don't think alike, but we need to start thinking alike in terms of what we want for Africa. What do you want for Nigeria? When you think of Nigeria, what future do you want for your kids? And we have to start thinking of where we spend our money, but also to support black businesses. They are automobile manufacturers in Nigeria that their own government aren't supporting. There's Innocent, there's also Nord. The government would rather import vehicles, excuse me, from France, bring that in, and have the entire workforce drive these vehicles instead of supporting their own businesses, because people don't see the value of buying a product that's made in your own nation. That's how you grow a nation. And the blueprint is China. This is a nation that was in famine and poverty decades ago. Look how powerful it is today. And you cannot tell me with a straight face that them manufacturing has not changed that. Because everywhere you look, a product is made in China. Everywhere. And that has really influenced their society. I understand there's ethical laws in what they do with slave labor, with kids doing. We have it in Africa, and the Europeans support that too, by the way. Look at Congo. So the same thing is happening across two different continents, apart from Chinese are utilizing on it for themselves, but we're still being exploited by Europeans, by the French, by the British. So I think we need to come together in terms of, as business people especially, because if we don't look after our own people, then who will?
You're absolutely right. And it's like I said, like there are so many no's why you shouldn't do it. But really and truly, there's no gray area here. Like you're either going to go and do something and do it, or we're going to all sit there in years and decades and cry that Africa has been colonialized through capitalism, not politically. So I mean, there's a question in the card game as well that asks, what's your opinion on the economic and political position of Africa within the world? And I guess that kind of answered it quite well, in a sense that, if we're not going to kind of position ourselves the right way as black people in the West, it's just going to be everybody else's bag again, and then we're just going to sit there and complain on social media and outrage every time something racist happens. And on the continent, it's like there's only really one way to kind of go about this. So tell me a little bit more about the challenges and obstacles you kind of faced opening the manufacturing company. Yes.
I think, well, first of all, like the business that I run and own is called Balbus Nigeria Limited. So we specialize in fabrication services. We produce food processing equipment such as spice grinders, meat, fish slicers, dewatering machine for vegetables. And our customers usually are people that come from the agro sector when it comes to that. But because we really are like a one-stop shop, we end up tapping into many different industries. And I'll speak on why that's important to do that when you're setting up a startup in Nigeria. But we also specialize in security fences for private and industrial estates, conveyor belt systems, modular. So a lot of the times you won't have the access to power, which I'll delve into our problems that we had with that as well. So a lot of the machinery that we do develop are manual as well as electricity powered, obviously machinery as well. But I think the big barrier that we had was power is a big issue. Like I remember as a kid landing in Muritala Mohammed Airport in Lagos and the power just...
on the airport. I remember that as
well. It was like, you'd have thought like a comedian was on stage and they just said the most hilarious thing. The whole airport was like laughing. And they were like, "Oh, more Nigeria, we're in Nigeria, this is Nigeria." Everyone's, and I was like, just looking around, I was like, why did the lights go off? Like, it's 150 degrees Celsius, it feels like in this airport. What's going on? And obviously I didn't know back then how it's ran in terms of the electrical output and the power grid, how that works. So it's called NEPA in Nigeria. So when you open up a facility where you need power coming in, you have to diversify the input that you have coming in. You can't just rely on the power grid because it goes on and off all the time and you have no control over it, unfortunately. So a lot of the times people tend to get diesel power generators, which is a standard thing that everyone will tell you. If you want to make something, you need electricity, don't rely on NEPA, go and get yourself a generator. But to go further, we have 3 separate inputs to be able to keep our power distribution running as efficiently as possible, because we batch manufacture, we don't mass produce. If you mass produce, that's a whole different devil to deal with. Yeah. So we also work with, we have solar, but what we're trying to develop at the moment is to work with hydropowered systems. So like almost you build a small dam, so you use the energy of the water essentially to store energy into a battery, and from then you can directly pull electricity coming from that. So this is something that I've been trying to push. Well, actually my entire family of engineers for the last 20 years have been trying to push onto Lagos State, because Lagos is surrounded by water and they're not making the most of it whatsoever. From an energy perspective, they could be doing so much more to improve the electrical infrastructure and the distribution of power within Lagos. So that's something that we're kind of been trying to work with the local university to deliver that, but it's a very long-term project and the costs are astronomical. Like a small business like ourselves, we have to work with people in order to deliver something like that, because it's not just for us, it's producing electricity for thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
You know, sorry to interrupt you, but I watched an interview a while ago from Akon on Drink Champs, and he was talking about providing electricity to African countries. And he was saying that the business of electricity within African countries, that's kind of stuff, if you come there and try to, you know, make moves, that's kind of stuff that gets you killed. Because obviously the whole world is benefiting from Africa being at the spot where it is. Do you believe that? Because you are doing like serious things. I know you're very humble about this, but what you're doing is serious, you know, especially, you know, finding different ways of generating electricity, the hydro thing, obviously looking at the resources that are there in African countries or in Nigeria, let's say, and you just, like you said, Lagos is surrounded by water. And it's interesting because I used to be I'm friends with an electrician, and he does a lot of work within Ghana, and he was talking about, like, you know, everybody's talking about solar and Africa, and it's like solar can't even be hot, so it's not necessarily the best thing for African countries. Yes, there's sun, but there's also heat, and heat and solar doesn't go along well. So the hydro thing, he was actually telling me about that. The hydro thing is actually
it's the future.
You know,
it really is.
So what you're doing is serious, and you're actually taking steps. Like I'm, you know, like you said, it's a long-term project, but you always have to start somewhere. So, and you know, as a revolutionary in some ways, because that is revolutionary, you know, it's always about thinking of planting trees which shade you won't be able to enjoy in the future, but it's something that, you know,
for the next,
but at least you're making the step for somebody else to come and take it further. Maybe your children, or maybe somebody you're just working with, younger people that you're going to get on your team at some point. Who knows, But I'm just wondering, when you go and do these kind of things and make these kind of moves on the ground, is there like serious resistance, or can you actually navigate and actually get somewhere?
Well, I think whenever an individual tries to alter the status quo, it's always going to be met by resistance, because people today are benefiting off the systems that are in place of a multitude of different things. But I think, quoting back to what you had said about Akon, there are systems in place where, if you look back in time, you look at people like Kwame Nkrumah, you look at Thomas Sankara, these individuals that were powerhouses inside the political systems of their country tried to create that type of change during the transfer of power from African nations being colonial extensions of European empires to the independent states that they are today. And they were murdered, like they were sabotaged, they were killed. And I think you have to be careful not to be too hasty and you have to be extremely patient with change, especially on the African continent, because you pushing something, you don't know what's going to fall out on the other side of that, because you're new here, you don't understand how things work. But I think it's possible to create good change and to still keep people fed. And what I mean by that is, if there is a system where people are monetizing, in terms of today, if people are not getting full access to power, which they're not, and let's say a certain individual is capable of monetizing off of that, I don't know how that would even work, but let's just say, just to be devil's advocate, you need to reintroduce a new system of monetization to that individual. So you can't take the food from someone's mouth and say, you need to do the right thing and look after these people, while he needs to then find out another way to build income for himself. And that's the reality. You have to find a way of feeding everyone. If you're going to introduce something, everyone needs to benefit from it. That way you don't ruffle up people's tail feathers. But that's also if they're open to that change as well. It's a slow, when you're looking at changing things that are systemic, that are systematic, it's always going to be a long journey. I love the quote that Tupac had said about, like, he didn't feel like he was going to be the change directly, but he sort of felt like if someone, listened to his music, they would be inspired to want to create that change. And I think I don't have that, I'm probably mispronouncing this word because I always do, naivety. I don't have that naivety that I'm like the problem solver to save everyone, and people don't need saving. And if they do, let them come to you. And I think for me, all I'm trying to do is to just do my part. As me. I'm not God. I'm just a normal person that has a belief system, and my belief system has taken me to where I am now. And I'm just going to do the best job I can do to serve people and to ensure that all these brilliant-minded Nigerians who have to go through one of the toughest education systems in the world, because someone who's studying a simple first degree, they might not leave university until their late 20s. In the UK, you're spending 3 years to do a BEng or a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Art. So I just want to provide a funnel for these people in order for them to explore themselves and to build a career within Balbus, or if not, to give them the tools to go and open up their own factories, because I think we need to work together to franchise. If we're looking at exporting, one business can't export to change everything. We need to have from Lagos down south to Abuja, in the middle to Kanu up north, all exporting. That would create a revolutionary economical renaissance period for Nigeria. And I believe in manufacturing, and no one's going to convince me that it's not the answer.
It really is, yes. Talk a little bit more about the talent on the ground, and the people, and the intelligence, the creativity, the determination, and the hustle. Talk a little bit about Nigerian people and what you've experienced. It's
wonderful. I miss, when I'm here in the UK, I miss the spirit of Nigeria, just seeing people, wherever you're looking on the street, someone is up to doing something on their own, something creative. We've picked artisans off the street and given them work to showcase and to show people what they're capable of doing. With a lot of our security fencing, we tend to have artistic features on the fencing as well. And we use artisans for that, and we employ them full time to do that. So I think also what's very interesting is if you take the median age, the top 10 countries with the lowest median age, they're all in Africa. The youngest population in the world is on the African continent. All top 10. Nigeria is number 4 or number 6 on that list, but they're all African nations. So it really is important to lay down the correct blueprint for these young people to ensure that they are getting themselves into the right careers, they're building a prosperous future for themselves, because as that time goes and the population starts to increase, that will have a knock-on effect on what is the actual global output in terms of what is Nigeria doing to reinforce itself as a powerhouse and an economy. So I think there's so much untapped talent that is there, especially within the tech sector, which many people are already switched on about. but the thing that's failing them is just the educational system, unfortunately. It's like constant striking, and it's a very damaged system where someone has to spend 7-8 years in education for something simple, and by the time they leave, there's no work for them. So I think I'm just kind of try to employ as many people as possible, but just like sort of, you kind of have to watch this space, I think. I have many plans on how to scale up, and I'm hoping that if all the steps are made correctly, then we can scale up at a very fast exponential rate over the next 2-3 years.
As diasporans, we are basically called to connect with the continent and to add value to the economy and to the socioeconomic environment within the countries usually that we are from, or that we're connected to due to our heritage, or sometimes even not. Even in African Americans are coming back to the African continents, doing DNA tests, or just choosing one that they feel the most connected to. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship between us as the diasporans and the African continent. I know personally, what we see a lot now, which I'm knocking but not knocking, is people using it as the new Ibiza or Dubai, and going there for 2 weeks and partying. I've done it myself, you know. I'm not saying, not just pointing my fingers. I haven't, you know. I mean, I'm looking to create more videos and connect, but I've so far also only gone for holiday and a little bit of work. Actually, I did actually employ people and you know, did some work there and filmed some footage on the continent. But at the same time, many of us just using it as the new holiday spot, going to pop a few bottles and then going back to your European life.
Back to the office.
Yes, and I mean, it's easier said than done. Like, there are not as many opportunities maybe, and it's not in everybody's mind to be a problem solver and to figure out what kind of business to start there, or not everybody has the capital to just go and invest now. But either way, I think it's an interesting topic, and I think we do have to be very mindful of how we position ourselves on the continent, economically, but also socially. You know, we can't just come there and spit our Western mindset thinking, oh, we know what's going on, and then just go there and basically look at the locals and be like, this is not how you do things. And I've seen interviews, I've seen people locals talk about how they don't like the attitude maybe that we have.
I'm glad you brought this up.
And yeah, so let's talk a bit about that. And obviously you spend more time in Nigeria and on the continent. What have you witnessed? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, for me, I think the first thing, I think not everyone has to go into business in order to contribute to the growth within African countries, especially us as diasporans as well. I think for me, like, I spent 5 years saving up in order to get to like where I was, which was really difficult and tough. But I think we as diasporans, when you get to Nigeria, especially Nigeria, I can't speak for other African countries because I've not been to them yet, but I think when you get there, it will really humble you if you keep a humble energy within yourself and you don't go there with these expectations. Because when I got there and I was told, oh yeah, like when you go around Lagos, like there's tons of like mixed race people, tons of like Nigerian returnees. And it's like you don't really get the opportunity to interact with those individuals, because it's like trying to approach a politician almost. Like they're being like driven in the back of like blacked out Range Rovers. Oh, okay. Like you don't really know where they are, and especially like where I'm based, which is like outside Lagos, which is a whole different place. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm constantly told, yeah, we have this. Like I've seen like it's quite a large Lebanese community that you have, but obviously these aren't diasporans like ourselves. Yeah. So I was very much like, I want to know where they are. Like where are these people hanging out? Because for me, I wanted to learn off them. Like there are some that maybe live here permanently that I could build a friendship with or something like that. Just to understand, obviously, but it didn't kind of go that way. And luckily for me, like I made more friends with the local people and started to push myself to learn the local language, because I think if you're going somewhere, like you need to at least try to assimilate. And I find that a lot of a lot of us that go out there, we don't. It's like we have this like spiritual fantasy of going back to Wakanda or something like that. And then when we get there, it's just very much like, oh, this isn't really like what I expected. And then you only end up seeing them like at these VIP clubs, at like rooftop bars. Like you don't see them in canteens. You don't see them like rubbing shoulders like with the local people. And I get, obviously there is like the fear that diasporans have of like, is it safe? Is it safe for me to leave my door, go to the gym in the morning and then go about my day without having fear of being, I don't know, kidnapped or something like that? But the thing I find absurd is that so many white British tourists go to Mexico on holiday. Mexico is not like the safest place in the world, but like when you speak to people, like they'll still like in thousands and thousands go to this place. And if you ask them like, is it safe? And they'll be like, yeah, like as long as you're in the resorts and things like that. And I'm like, but then they'll flip that on its head and be like, is Nigeria safe? And I'm like, bro, it's the same. Like these are places outside of Europe where anything can happen if you're a silly individual. That can happen. But I think the important thing is not to keep like this fixation of I'm going there and I'm better than they are. And they have more to learn from me as a diasporan than I can learn from them, because you'll actually be surprised that there is a wealth of knowledge and there is so much you learn about yourself from spending time in spaces where you feel uncomfortable. That's when you grow. You grow when you're uncomfortable, not when you're comfortable and you have your nice feng shui and you've got your nice rooftop and things like that. That doesn't build growth. Like growth is putting yourself in positions where you're like, okay.
Yeah, I absolutely get what you mean. It happens a lot that you get to like an African country, like I have more experience in Ghana, and then you live like the high society life.
Yeah,
you're always in a cab, you're always going to the rooftops, you're always going to the finest bars. Yeah, and you don't really get to interact much with the locals. I don't just think it's a thing of like, I'm better than you, but it's also like a cultural divide, because as much as we Africans, but we're also Europeans. So there's only so much you could maybe be able to relate,
of course,
culturally. And then I guess also certain things have something to do with like a certain level of living standard we used to, as Europeans. There's only going to be certain places I would want to stay at because I want X, Y, Z. And then maybe local people, they have a bit more of a minimalistic way of seeing things or requirements and needs, because we are quite spoiled as Westerners with everything we have.
Of course, in comparison,
We're quite privileged in a way with these things, but then not so privileged with other things. I mean, everything comes with pros and cons. But tell me a little bit about an experience that you had having to like adapt to local ways, because you really and that's what, when we spoke last time, you really are with the locals. You're not going there to live this like blacked out Land Rover.
I always envied it. I always envied it for a second. I was seeing it and I was like, I spoke to one of my uncles and we had drove past, like he sort of took me on like a bit of a tour, and we moved around. He was like, oh, this is a tennis club and there's this and that. And the thing I understood, like there's compound spaces called GRAs. So it'd be like GRA, GRA. And I was like, what does this GRA thing mean? And it was like, back when Nigeria was colonized, this is where like all the white people lived. They lived in these nice areas. And then we lived on the outside, and if we were in there, it's because we as Nigerians, we worked for them inside these estates and things like that. But yeah, he was very much like pointing out these places where he thinks like diasporans would be, but really didn't know, to be honest, because he doesn't move in those social spaces himself. So for me, like I remember going to some of like the really small canteens where we'd have like eforiro, we'd have amala, we'd have like different types of swallow and things like that, and people would be like very like confused as to like why I was there. They're like, why is this Oyinbo person sitting here? We're like, what's he doing? Like, why is he in this canteen? Isn't there somewhere better he should be? Is there somewhere else he should be? And I remember like eating, like people just stopped eating. They were just staring at me. And like my uncle was like, what's your problem? Have you never seen a white person sit down and eat food before? You have TVs at home.
Yeah.
And then people just sort of like snapped out of it and just carried on. But I also had like younger people. Usually when I wasn't like surrounded by like my elders, I feel like a lot of people were discouraged to come and speak to me. But then like after becoming more comfortable and things like that, I'd move away kind of on my own, try and find my own little space and things like that. And then like people would approach me and be like, oh, like what brings you here? Like, why are you here? It's so strange to see you eating in my local like canteen. Like usually like, you know, people like you aren't around here. And I was like, why is that? And he was just very much like, I don't think they like being here. I don't know. Like, we just don't see them. Like, maybe they're not comfortable being here.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm comfortable being here. I was like, for me, culture is here. Like, the culture lives here.
Yeah.
It doesn't live at the rooftop party. Like, it's nice being there. And of course, I went to go and experience that too. You have to. I want to experience all of it.
Yes.
But in terms of like the day-to-day, like, that was an interesting thing. But I remember leaving the airport and just being very anxious of like, I don't really know like what I've let myself in for. I've sort of pretty much put all my life savings into this. And me doing that had a big knock-on effect on my internal family structure as well. So everything was kind of on the line at that point. So from going out there, and I remember going to one of like a relative's house, and I'd gone to like open up a tap, and like the water didn't look like water, and I was like, this is gonna be tough, man. What am I doing? Have I just made the biggest mistake of my life?
Yeah.
Did I let my fantasy take over my mind? I was like, what am I doing here?
Yes.
And it took a long time to assimilate to like where to go, not, you know, the reasons why things were happening. And then in the end, I discovered why that had happened is because the water wasn't, there was something wrong with the taps or something like that, the water coming into that. Because the thing I like about Nigeria is everyone has their own version of Nigeria. I could go out there for a month, do me. You could go out there, do you. We come back together, we sit on this couch. How was your experience? You could be like, do you know what? It was the most enlightening experience. Like, I met all these people. I went to these cultural hubs. I learned this, I did that. And you're like, how did your experience go? And I'm like, do you know what? I just hated it. I got stung by mosquitoes. I didn't like it. The energy I couldn't charge my phone. I didn't have a phone for 2 days because I couldn't charge it in time. Like, everyone has a different experience. And I think for me, I learned that you can build your own lifestyle, like whatever requirements you have. It's just a case of just being patient to find your groove of things, of like, if this is the type of house you want to be in, great, you can be in that house. If these are the places you want to eat at, cool. But you can incorporate all things of being with local people and also having what you're used to. It doesn't have to be one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like, only stay at expensive places, only talk to foreigners. Like, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
It can be mixed.
Can
like,
be both,
after
yeah.
all, like, there are many affluent local people as well
Yeah.
who choose to live a type of way too. But the interesting thing is, like, I don't think there's not much of like a middle class system. It's kind of like you're either working class or you're, you know.
Yeah. What would be your message to diasporans? Because like you said, after our interview that went kind of viral on Instagram, there's so many people that messaged you, so many people that want to connect, so many people that want to know more about your journey and what you're doing.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
What would be your general message to diasporans thinking about connecting with the continent?
I think first of all, if you wish to do that in the first place, I think that's amazing. And that's the first step for you. But I think take your time with things. Don't set expectations on how you think things should go. I think you should let the outside world teach you. Be open to nuances, because you may even find parts of yourself that you don't understand or know yet from putting yourself through these experiences. So I think from the day-to-day people that want to spend time out there, first reconnect. Like, reconnect with people, cousins, people that are in your family. Like, I know, trust me, I know what it is when people are like, listen, I don't want to talk to anyone back home because they just asked me for money, and then I don't want to speak to this person and that person. And I'm like, okay, I get that, because I've heard this throughout my entire life with like relatives and things like that. But you need to be connected to the people there in order to connect. Like you can't go there on your own and expect people to lay down a red carpet for you and be like, well done, diasporan, for returning. Like, it's not like that. Nobody cares. It's important. It should be important to you and you only, the journey that you're going on.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to reconnect with people. If you can't reconnect, then look for people that are already kind of to and fro. Go to networking events. Like, ask your friends, do you know anyone? Can you put me in touch with someone that's been to Ghana? Can you put me in touch with someone that's been to Nigeria, to Cameroon, to Congo, wherever, Sierra Leone, like any nation. And I think that's the first thing. But to switch back into individuals who want to build enterprises as well as reconnecting, like myself, I think it's important. We've already taken the first step to create the narrative of the importance of buying black. But I think we need to now start pushing into the narrative of we need to make black. Like, where is your thing come from? Are you at the source? Are you at the source of origin of this product? Like, we need to control our ecosystem. We can't have other people doing that for us because we don't know if those people care about us.
I mean, we do know if they care.
I mean, we do, we do. That's, speaking bluntly, it is that. Like, we don't know, like, what narrative they have about us as a people. Like, we're just there. They have their own agenda and it is what it is. And I don't think that's going to change. But I think take your time with things, lower your expectations. And before you know it, once you become comfortable in being in those spaces, you will grow and flourish, and you'll see new parts of yourself. But please try to assimilate with the local people. And when I say local people, I know how some people are, how they visualize things. I'm not talking of micro villages of people. Like, I'm talking of local people in general. Like, if you're in a city, the local people out there, who works down there? Who do you see every morning when you wake up? Try and interact with these people, you know, because that's the thing, like, from spending so much time, like, the community, like, everything is still very much community driven, like, in those spaces. And when I come back to the UK, it's more of you have to have a conscious effort to have that community here. It feels like it doesn't feel like it's the default way of behaving. Everyone, especially in the city of London, is like, I just do my own thing. I'm like,
it's a literal, you have to go out of your way to
and even then it's like, oh wow, this guy's a bit unusual. I don't really know this person. Sort of
smiling too much.
Do you know what I mean? So I think we can take a leaf, you know, out of that book to see the way that they're living, the fact that they're still very much in touch with themselves, and that's the thing, like, from us being out here, from growing our lives and things like that. Like, some of us have lost touch, or we feel like we've lost touch, and that's why we're in love with this mystery of, like, wanting to go back and to find ourselves and who are our people and things like that. So I think just take your time with things. First, just book yourself a holiday, spend some time out there, see how you feel about things, and then just take things step at a time.
Okay. What's your call to action, and how can we support you? I mean, I'm like one of your number one fans, and I hope we get to work together more in the future. I hope so too. And I'd love, like we said before, to come to Ibadan and film a documentary or what you're doing on the ground, you know. That'd be great. But yeah, definitely need to make it to Lagos, Nigeria very soon. I've spent so much time in Ghana with my friends, and I've been to Nigeria, but I haven't been on the ground like that yet. So I need to do that 2025. And obviously I want to stay longer. So it's about saving up. So, you know, everything still runs and, you know, and see where the page goes as well. But what's your call to action? How can we support you? And what do you need from us?
Yeah, I mean, so the call to action, to be honest, like, we have, so the business is Balbus Nigeria. So if you literally just Google search that, you'll see we're developing, we're changing the website now because the business has kind of transformed since when we had started up. So we now want that to reflect the change. But so if you search Balbus Nigeria Limited on Google, you will find us, everything that we do.
Lovely.
but then also if you just spreading the word that there is a manufacturer inside Nigeria that can produce food processing equipment, conveyor belts, security gates and fences, heavy lifting equipment,
Yeah.
and just everyday metal fabrication services. We really do a lot as a
Yes.
company.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to sort of tap into, is that we didn't go over there with the idea to develop one product.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tend to do that. And if the business fails, you have no alternative sort of thing to jump to. So you end up losing a lot of money and then packing your bags and coming back to Europe. Whereas like my intention was to have a shop where we fabricate, we make many things, we cater towards a wide market of needs, of demands. So I think in terms of support, just stay plugged in. Follow. If you follow me online, my full name, Marcus Balogun, you see a lot of the stuff that I plug, of what we're doing, what we're keeping up, the trade shows that we go to, but just promote black manufacturing as a whole. Like, aside from me, if you identify or you see someone that is a manufacturer and the business is owned by a black African, promote and push that person, because right now we kind of are these unicorns in the corner, but I know that will change. And yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest, man.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.